Welcome to Life is Beautiful. I'm Anthony. Today I want to do a little bit of a deep dive into what I am calling the Belgian number family. The Belgian number family consists of a series of different beer styles that are all utilizing the same naming convention, often originate from the same source, which is monastic brewing traditions in Belgium. And they include things such as the Belgian Inkel, the Double, the Triple, and the Quad. Each of these beer styles have their own unique history. They do have their unique sensory characteristics. And I originally wanted to do an individual video on each respective beer style. But after I did all my research, I kind of realized they're more of a family. I felt it would be better to actually keep the family together and talk about their evolution. So without further ado, let's get into the history of the Belgian number family of beers. So as I was saying, they do share a unique naming convention, originating from the Dutch or Flemish language. The Inkel means single, Double is double, triple, quad, quadruple. Makes sense. Pretty simple to follow. There is some debate where this naming convention actually comes from. There's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of theories, but not a whole lot of factual evidence. One of the predominant theories is that it's like one recipe that's brewed stronger, and stronger, doubling the ingredients, tripling the ingredients, quadrupleizing the ingredients. But that's not necessarily the case. If you were to look at each of these respective beer styles in their glasses, you can tell they're not the same. They're not the same beer style. They're not the same recipe. One of the leading theories that I see is that traditionally Belgian monks, when they were going through brewing their beers, everything was based off of the degrees, the Plato, the actual starting gravity numbers. And if it was, the first strongest beer that they would brew, they would mark the barrel with a single X or a cross. The second strongest beer would get that 2 X's, so on and so forth. I've seen a lot of very respected sources push this narrative, so it is a very common theory, but I've seen a lot of other sources push back against this and say that there is no factual evidence that this was ever a practice that was utilized within monastic brewing. I'm not going to say it is a definitive answer, a definitive reason for the naming convention, but I do think there is some truth in it. I mean, if you do look at these, the strength does climb. Maybe they didn't mark the barrels, I don't know. But for simplicity's sake, I think that makes sense. So let's get into the actual respective beer styles themselves, starting with the Inkel, or the Single, or the Extra. It's got a lot of names. Interestingly, the Inkel is both the newest and the oldest of all the numbered beer family. What I mean by that is Inkels were the primary beers brewed by brewing monks, right? All throughout the Cistercian orders, Trappist orders, Pater's beer. They brewed beers that were designed to be drank by the fathers. Pater's beer, father's beer. Less alcoholic, lighter in body beer that was designed to more hydrate and provide nutrition to the monks as they conducted their monthly duties, which often included pretty hard, intensive manual labor. And the Inkel serves that purpose fantastically, coming in at an ABV of only around 2 to 4% depending on what brewery it's coming from. Interestingly, some records indicate that the Inkel was being brewed utilizing what is known as the party guile method, the process of where you would brew a normal full-strength beer, take that wort away, and then they would re-mash it, getting the absolute last bit of sugar extraction out of their grains, which would result in a lighter ABV beer, lighter in body, all around just lighter, more sessionable beer, which seems to be the perfect basis to create the Inkel. Now, the Inkel, as you'll see, is a rather pale, brilliant beer, right? But if we look at historical brewing records coming out of Belgium, monkish brewing often use very rustic, unfiltered, darker beers. So originally, the Inkel likely would have been a bit closer in appearance and possibly characteristics to the Double. Now, the historic Inkel probably would have stayed mostly the same for centuries, really, until around the 20th century when Belgium did start adopting paler malt. The Inkel, as we know it today, this beautiful golden beer, it probably would not have existed until the 1900s at the earliest. But it is hard to know that because the very nature of Inkel, of Pater's beer, it was for the monks. It was brewed for the monks. So there wasn't really much commercial pushing of this style of beer into the general market. So with that said, let's get into the modern Inkel. Inkels are light-bodied, brilliant colored ales that are often clarified, but sometimes unfiltered. The Inkel showcases a live carbonation and a frothy white head. The aroma and flavor are jam-packed with huge esters and phenolic scents, typical of Belgian ales, which showcases assertive spices, banana, bubblegum, and over the top of a soft cracker-like undertone. I do get why people say that the Inkel is a session triple. Every Inkel that I've had does have a slight sweet touch in the background, especially American craft interpretations, and this largely stems from the use of pale Belgian candy sugar, much the same way its bigger numbered brothers do. The most appealing aspect of the Inkel to me is the fact that it does remain true to its historical intent. And by that, I mean it is incredibly sessionable. It is certainly the most quaffable of all the Belgian numbered beer styles, right? And that's what it was designed to do. It's nutritious, it's hydracious, right? And when I'm out on a hot day and I crack into a beautiful Belgian Inkel, I feel relaxed. This could be a great replacement for, your lawnmower beers, your shower beers, your barbecue summer beers, if you just want a little bit more of that Belgian-y flavor in your life. So now that we got the Inkel out of the way, the next beer we need to talk about is the Dubbel. As you can see, the Dubbel is in a stark contrast to the Inkel. It is definitely darker in color. The head isn't as frothy cloud-like white. It's more of a frothy cloud-like khaki. The Dubbel is essentially double beer in the context of monastic brewing tradition. As you can tell, it is not a double of the Inkel recipe, since most modern Inkels are incredibly pale and the Dubbel is quite dark. No, the Dubbel is the double of that historic Inkel that we talked about originally, kind of giving further credence to the theory that historic Inkels were dark. The interesting thing about the Dubbel is where the Inkel was meant for drinking throughout the day and not becoming inebriated, the Dubbel was meant more as a nutritious liquid sandwich, There are still some Trappist monasteries to this day that consume Dubbels for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, As they're eating their meals, they enjoy a nice glass of Dubbel beer. It provides just an extra oomph in the caloric content level. And yes, it does have a little bit of a stronger ABV, ranging between 6 to 8% on average, but a single glass of Dubbel is probably not enough to completely intoxicate a monk, especially if he's been doing that day in, day out for years, decades maybe. Out of all the numbered beer styles, the Dubbel is my favorite in terms of sensory characteristics. The flavor of a well-made Dubbel is completely unparalleled in my opinion. All the typical spice and ester expected in a Belgian ale is pushed up against the flavors of over-ripened red apples and fresh-baked bread. The subtle sweetness of brown sugar and toffee notes peek out from the background, but never in a cloying manner. It's also in the Dubbel where you will start to notice a little bit of an alcoholic touch. But the presence of alcohol is almost like brandy-ish, not quite as strong, but certainly has that refined alcohol flavor, completely absent of fusel notes. The body is a firm medium, and the finish is both silky and cleaner than expected in most other nations' brown ales. Carbonation is still lively, but certainly toned down in comparison to the Inkel. The first Dubbel production started in Westmalle in the early 1800s. The practice of brewing stronger beers that we would recognize today as a Dubbel had existed way, way longer. But with that said, all the examples of monastic Dubbels that you're going to find in the market today largely are based off of the recipe formulated by Westmalle. So they weren't the first to ever make a recognizable beer that could be identified as a Dubbel. They were just the first ones to really solidify its parameters. The Westmalle monks, they tinkered around with the recipe that they were originally calling their Dubbel Brown for decades until it was finally officially released in 1856 to great renown. People were really excited to get more beer out of the Trappist brewery, right? And they liked that it was a bit more refined, a bit stronger, and a bit more flavorful than the typical Inkel beers that were being released at that time. Unfortunately, the Westmoreland monks were forced to abandon their monastery and their brewing operations during World War I after Germany had invaded Belgium. As the Germans swept through Belgium, the production of all Trappist beer largely grinded to a halt. The Westmoreland Double would not really see the light of day again until around the 1920s, when the Westmoreland monks were able to come back to their monastery and begin brewing operations once again. Now, an interesting byproduct came out of those halt in operations. As soon as the Trappist monks were able to resume their brewing operations across Belgium, there was a huge increase in interest in Belgian Trappist products. We started seeing more monastic breweries become much more successful, kind of solidifying themselves into the state they are today, a new plateau of quality. And the Double, especially the one from Westmalle, was certainly at the forefront of that new interest. But there was a little bit of a problem. There seemed to have been some loss in knowledge going on between World War I and post-World War I, and Westmalle was having a lot of trouble producing their original Double brown beer. They had to go back through, tinker with the recipe once again, making some alterations. This time, they made a slightly stronger beer and a slightly darker beer thanks to the inclusion of caramelized sugar produced from beets. That's probably also what helps give it that beautiful reddish glow. That inclusion of the beet syrup, it really helped boost the ABV, certainly, which intrigued people since they were looking for stronger beers, but it also gave off the perception of being more nutritious, more hearty, because it was darker. All the while, it did not change the overall mouthfeel or really the flavor to a high degree, because that sugar syrup was incredibly fermentable. It had insane efficiency, so the actual body of the beer did not get heavier, did not get syrupier. It just got a slight tweak in sweetness and a bit of a higher ABV. And it was so successful that other Trappist breweries and other monastic brewing operations followed suit, and they started releasing doubles in the Westmalle fashion of their own, essentially solidifying the concept of a beer style. I had to change clothes. There was absolutely no way that I was going to be able to sit down here and dome 4 beers straight to the skull that are kind of known for their strength. So it's been a couple hours, changed clothes, back at it. The next beer style we're going to talk about in the Belgian numbered beer family is the beautiful Golden Triple. The history and story of the triple also revolves around Westmalle, which is kind of seen as the shining example for what a triple should be, since it was one of the first ones out there. However, according to most historians, to include Michael Jackson, the beer hunter, the actual first real triple was actually secularly made, not in a monastery, and that is the Witkap Peter's triple. A brewer named Hendrik Verlinden attempted to brew a beer that could compete with the rising influence of imported Pilsner beers. His first release came in 1929, called Witkap Peter, or the White Hat Father, inspired by the wardrobe of the Trappist monks. Now you might notice that the triple does kind of stand out a little bit, because the rest of the beers in the Belgian number beer family were all created and developed behind the walls of a Trappist monastery, except for the triple. Except kind of not really, because Mr. Verlinden had a very, very surprising tie to the brewing monks at Westmalle. For decades, Mr. Verlinden was an advisor for the Westmalle brewing monks, especially in terms for how to utilize proper fermentation practices, but he was also quite renowned for his recipe design. And the Westmalle monks would frequently seek him out in order to tweak and adjust their different recipes in order to get the best possible product. In fact, in beer author Stan Hieronymus's book, Brew Like a Monk, he describes how Verlinden actually assisted Westmalle in the retooling of their double recipe. Seeing the rising tide of popularity in Belgian strong pale beers, Westmalle actually sought out Mr. Verlinden once again to create a strong blonde beer of their own. Utilizing all the lessons learned from brewing his Whitcap Pater beer, he essentially helped create the foundational layers for Westmalle to brew their own beautiful, glorious triple beer. Now, Westmalle's triple wasn't originally called a triple. It was actually called super beer. It wasn't until the 1950s that they actually started to utilize the triple name for themselves. So this is a rare instance of a secular brewing innovation actually contributing to the Trappist order, when most of the time, especially when you're looking at their other styles, the Inkel, the Double, and the Quad, it's the exact opposite. But together, these two beers, the Whitcap and the Westmalle triples, they essentially created the groundworks for one of the most popular Belgian style beers around the globe. The triple is a great return to the paler beers like the Inkel. It has many of the same characteristics. As I mentioned earlier, they oftentimes call Inkel a session triple. The only difference is you're going to get a much stronger, boozier flavor. Some triples start at 8 and they can go all the way up to 10-11% ABV. You're still going to get those really big Belgian yeasty ale flavors that you would expect out of a Belgian ale. You are going to get a lot of the beautiful paler malt flavors, a little cracker, a little toasted bread, similar to the Inkel, but definitely much more so. You obviously need more malt to create more ABV, right? But honestly, the true test of a good, high quality triple all comes down to the presence of the alcohol. A well-made triple is definitely going to have that boozier punch. It should almost taste like a bit of a stronger wine, maybe even inching into like brandy territory, but it should never be fusel. And there are a lot of triples that are on the market in the American scene, in the Belgian secular scene, and even some Belgian Trappist triples that are just so overtly boozy that it's hard to enjoy. The important thing to know is that the triple does stay relatively in line with the rest of the beers. It is highly attenuated. It does have like a medium body. You're never going to get into that heavy aspect. It definitely has a clean fermentation in the sense that you're not having like a sticky sweet mess left behind in your mouth. The mouthfeel is oftentimes a little bit dry, and that's going to just invite you to drink more, which makes the triple so dangerous because of its sky-high ABV. But it is still incredibly drinkable, and it has a nice effervescent, nice bubbly carbonation going on. So all around, it does serve many of the same purposes that I look for in an Inkel. It's a good summer beer, a good daytime drinking beer, just not quite as sessionable. But with all that said, I will say that the Belgian triple is actually kind of hard to define. In fact, some beer historians and authors don't even consider it to be its own unique beer style, instead falling underneath the overarching Belgian Golden Strong Ale category. I mean, at best, we could possibly make the argument that there is the triple X, strength type thing going on that we mentioned earlier with in regards to marking barrels being the third strongest beer that the brewery produced. But as I said earlier, that's not even entirely based in fact. And to make matters worse, that beer, that triple strength beer that was brewed back then, it wouldn't really be like the triple we know it today. In beer author Tim Webb's book, Good Beer Guide to Belgium, Tim describes how many of these beers would have been relatively strong and likely much darker than the triples we know today. So it would have been more so of like a even stronger double, which, going by the nomenclature, I could see the desire to call it a triple. And speaking of doing whatever they want to anyways, let's talk about the Golden Drac triple. The Golden Drac triple is a relatively new beer, only first being released in the 1980s. It calls itself a triple, but it's incredibly dark. Obviously, it's going to have a little bit more malty and more darker tones because of the malt utilized to create its color. Its body is a little bit fuller as well. But if I have to be honest, I do still think it maintains an essence of being a triple. The alcohol is noticeable, it is punchy, but it's also very well made. It's refined, it's smooth, it's rounded out, much the way I would expect out of a triple. So if we are adhering to the concept of a triple being just a stronger beer produced by a brewery, yeah, I think it is a bit harder to truly define what is and what isn't, and where the line between triple and any other beer style really exists. But the cool thing about that Golden Drac Triple, I'm not trying to drag it by any means, is it is probably the closest we can get in the modern era to those historical, maybe hypothetical brown triples that we talked about earlier. And speaking of beer styles people don't say actually exist, the last beer on our little counting journey is the quad. The Belgian quad, standing for quadruple, is one of the most revered beer styles in the world, with many major name brands being desperately sought after. Surely any beer lover will recognize the Westy 12, the St. Bernardus Abbey 12, or the Chimay Blue. The Belgian quad, and to be a bit more specific, specifically the Trappist quad, is a bit of a calling sign. It's what makes breweries kind of known for, because in my experience, when people go hunting after those monk beers or they're actually looking for Trappist beers, I've seen people shun every other beer style, heading straight for the quads. That's how renowned, how revered it is as a beer style. The quad is the strongest of the Belgian number beer styles, with a fearsome ABV ranging between 9 to 15% ABV. The alcohol will certainly be observed. However, like any good quality Trappist beer, it should not be fusel. Instead, the alcohol flavor should come across more so like a bourbon in my palate, or like a brandy, you know, something a bit more refined, something a bit more rounded, not that rubbing alcohol flavor. You know, that's kind of a similar trait amongst all these stronger numbered beers. They should not be fusel, but especially the quad with its huge ABV should definitely not be. The color is a dark, rich mahogany and a dark toffee colored head. The body is full and often leaves a wet-like feeling in the mouth, however, is somehow well attenuated and far from syrupy. The flavor is sweet but should never be cloying. There is a bitterness but far from what I would consider to be a hoppy beer. The flavor of a quad is something truly special to behold. So many dark, roasted, sugary notes, burnt sugar, caramel, toffee, so much dark fruit, raisins, prunes, dates, and figs, all encapsulated in a beautiful, mellow alcohol flavor. It's like the dark fruits were soaked in brandy. You'll sometimes get hints of chocolate in there, toasted marshmallow, and all up against a nice, rich, baked bread flavor. If a well-made double is an act of love, then a well-made quad is an act of God. With the quad, balance and perfection of all the different flavors and characteristics, that's the marker, that's the make of a good quality quad. Balance. Interestingly, the quad is actually the newest of all the Belgian number beers, if you exclude the kind of newer, paler re-release of the Inkel to the commercial market. The quad was only first created in 1991 by the La Trappe brewery up in Koningshoven, Netherlands. I specifically mention the Netherlands because it's also the only of the commonly accepted numbered beer family that did not originate in Belgium. Although there is an argument to be made that the Netherlands and Belgium were part of like the lowland countries, possibly part of France at one point in time. There's a whole history I'm not getting into, but in the modern day geography, it is the only one that was originated and created outside of Belgium. But that is still pretty interesting because most people associate the quad with Belgium. In fact, many will even say the Belgian quad, despite the fact that La Trappe, Koningshoven, Netherlands, they were the inventors. They were the first. And it was incredibly popular. I mean, people really enjoyed the intensity, the strength, and above all, the flavor and the quality of the quad. It was so good that almost every other Trappist brewery immediately followed suit, releasing their own quads, or at least a beer that could be considered a quad. One of the interesting things that I found while reading through this is that just like the triple, the quad is argued whether it is in fact its own unique beer style or if it falls under the category of the Belgian dark strong ale. And they do so because many other quads actually do not use the term quad. Instead, they will simply reference the original gravity. That's why there's the Westy 12, the St. Bernardus 12, so on and so forth. The people who make this argument claim that quad is less of a beer style and more of a trademarked beer brand name, hence why the other breweries don't call theirs quads. I think that the quad, just like the triple, is its own unique beer style. Despite all of that, I would say that the quad is one of the most fundamental aspects of the modern beer world as I see it, because it was one of the original styles that created massive hype. It was the foundational block on which the modern day craft beer hyper release industry was built off of. Every single brewer aspired to brew something that would be as sought after, as beloved as Westy 12. And the quad in the modern era has become something that brewers really test their mettle up against. All right, so let's get to the conclusion. It is without a doubt, it is undeniable that the Belgian beer number family played a significant role in the entire history of beer, especially in the American craft beer scene where they inspired so many brewers. If you go look at many of the legacy brewers or many of the early craft beer pioneers in the American scene, they oftentimes recognized how important Belgian beers were to inspiring their passion. These beers created a generation of brewers who thus birthed a generation of rabid beer fanatics, which resulted in the craft beer boom. Each one of them is incredibly unique, incredibly stylistically special. Every single one of these beers are a building block for somebody to get into beer. They could all serve as a gateway. You like your lighter, paler, sessionable beers? I got an Inkle for you. You like to get a little dark? You're a fan of American brown ales or English brown ales? I got a Double for you. You like lighter beers? You hate darker beers, but you want a little bit of a punch? Bam, Triple. And you're a big fan of big, strong, dark beers? Quad. I mean, the whole spectrum is covered. There is not a single beer here that somebody who enjoys beer could not find a new love in. And they continue to inspire brewers and drinkers. In fact, in America right now, in the craft beer scene, there are beers being marketed as quints, stronger than quads, double quads in essence. Only time will tell if that is a welcomed and accepted, beer into the numbered pantheon. But, secular beers have made their way in here before, so there is precedence. I just don't think these beers could ever fall into obscurity. They're just too important to the craft beer scene. They're just too important to the world of beer and beer history. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. I know this was an incredibly long one, but I tried to do my best to just hit the wave tops of 4 different beer styles. Technically 5, kind of, but I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. Remember, there is a story in every bottle, and that life is beautiful. Cheers.